the future of crypto and the future of Bitcoin will be made in the USA.
Most people who are dismissive of Bitcoin, it's not their fault. They're seeing what the mainstream narratives are around it. They hear that it's for criminals. But once you really do the work, it's a one-way street. And I think Donald Trump is traveling down that one-way road right now. And it's really interesting to watch it.
And now JD Vance, 39 years old, millennial, pro-crypto. What do you make of that?
This is a guy who, before he was a politician, bought a bunch of Bitcoin because he believed in it. He has a lot of rhetoric in the past about regulators, specifically Gary Gensler in the SEC. It's great to cheer for the politicians who are going to help the industry, but they're not going to make the really big changes that we're here for.
I want to ask you about something, Scott. Security of your own assets and also security of your safety. And unfortunately, the ways to securely hold your crypto are terrible these days.
So for me individually, I have 3 phones. I don't carry a phone that has access to literally anything. I have complex multi-sig, so if you kidnapped me, you'd have to fly around the country with me to get multiple hardware devices, hit them in random places to even get anything out of me.
Just want to finish with big picture. Are you having fun in this market? This isn't always what you did. Now you're highly regarded as one of the big influencers in this space.
People, I think, take for granted that you were always this big. I learned how to talk to an audience in this market when I had 3 followers, not 1 million. At the end of the day, I'm doing something I love literally every day. There's a whole world of innovation and exciting developments happening. And I think it's really amazing that for the first time, anyone, anywhere can participate.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Scott Melker, the former music producer turned cryptocurrency investor, trader, and broadcaster. You previously worked as a DJ with some of the biggest names in the music industry before turning your attention to the world of Web3 and the blockchain. You are the host of the Wolf of Wall Street's podcast and author of the Wolf Den newsletter, while also being a regular contributor to the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Cointelegraph. You're considered one of the leading voices in the crypto industry and have been named Influencer of the Year by Binance. You have recently stated that Bitcoin will play a pivotal role in the upcoming election with the announcement of the pro-crypto JD Vance as Donald Trump's running mate. You have predicted that Bitcoin will comfortably reach $100,000 by the end of the year due to a combination of forces creating the perfect storm in crypto. Scott, welcome back to the London Real.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Always a pleasure to speak to you through a screen, although it's better when we bump into each other in person.
Yeah, we were joking earlier. It's like I've seen you in 3 different continents recently, although we only get to talk for 2 minutes. So it's only digitally we get to actually have a proper convo.
That's exactly right.
Hence the world. Look, I'm going to jump right into it. You tweeted a couple hours ago kind of your assessment of the market, and it's this combination of forces that you believe will push Bitcoin past 6 figures. You listed a whole plethora of things, from the Bitcoin ETF to the upcoming Ethereum ETF to the talk about tokenization, RWEs, this regime change politically, stable coins, market overhangs like the Mt. Gox thing, and of course the Bitcoin conference coming up. Of course, after your tweet, the market responded and we're seeing, Bitcoin push even higher. Where do we start? Do we start with the convention and the assassination? Is that where we start?
I think so.
Yeah. I was just going to bed on Saturday night and I checked my Twitter before and I saw little bits of clips of, Trump getting shot. And of course, as a former Wall Street trader, I quickly checked the crypto markets. And I think Bitcoin had gone from like 58 and change up to 59 and change. And I thought, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Right now, I think we're at 67K or close to it, around that. That's quite a move in 6 days. What do you make of all of this? What's your read on everything that's happened?
First, as far as the price move, I think there's a variety of factors. Technical analysts looking at charts would have told you, hey, we're ranging, through the summer. It's the post-halving summer doldrums. And we're in that part of the 4-year cycle where you go to the bottom of the range in the low 60s, high 50s, and then you bounce and you go up. So I wasn't really surprised at the price action regardless. That said, it's hard not to look at what happened to President Trump and not see it as a catalyst for this move and compare it to Silicon Valley Bank's failure last year and what we saw Bitcoin do in the aftermath of a fundamental move that caused uncertainty in the United States and in the markets. And so I think Bitcoin, while it's only a few events that we have, there are many others in history, it is interesting to see how it responds when there's a ton of uncertainty in legacy markets and in the world. And it does tend to have that upward movement. Now, many would point to, I think, the very sad attempted assassination of Trump. And I have to say, regardless of your politics, your feelings about him or any other candidate, violence should never enter politics. And anyone who is not appalled by that event should be immediately written off as a kook, because it's horrid, that happened. And it took me 2 or 3 days to even go and tweet about the market because I felt like it was inappropriate to talk about a market reaction to such a fundamentally horrifying event. But that's what the business is. And so we do have to talk about it. And I think for a lot of people, it was not only, the fact that he survived or the uncertainty, but certainly that it made the odds of him winning higher in people's minds, that he had sort of been a living martyr, for the country in their minds. And it just increased the odds, as you can see, even on, betting sites and predictive markets like Polymarket. Now he's over 70% chance to win with people who are actually betting real money on that outcome, which is probably the best place you can go to see what the odds are. So in my mind, it's just been this steady increase of rhetoric from him, whether it's a deep-seated new belief or it's just political is effectively irrelevant. He's talking about crypto. He's pro-crypto. He's surrounding himself with people who are pro-crypto, including his vice presidential candidate. And we know what the last 3 years have been, right? So when you look at those, it's effectively bipolar. And so any chance of replacing that already, I think, would have been bullish for the market. But when you replace it with someone who's now outwardly, pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin, stating to be pro-freedom, I think that's really what's happening here. I mean, it's just a movement now. We have nothing but tailwinds in an environment where we probably expected at this point to have nothing but headwinds. It's really shocking. I said it to you. I didn't have it on my bingo card. It's completely unexpected to me that we are in the place we are. If you go back even 12 months, probably shorter, but even 12 months and look at the environment that crypto was existing in the United States, it was atrocious. We had the SEC coming after Coinbase and Binance in back-to-back days. We had not seen the Ripple and the Grayscale victories yet. The SEC was deemed to never lose. It was impossible. Everything they said was considered law. And we really didn't even have a leg to stand on in the United States. Every company operating in crypto was leaving, opening offices in foreign countries. And it's been a wholesale reversal now. And even, Trump's pivot has caused even a thawing on the Biden side, which is an interesting part of the story where regardless of who wins, it seems the environment has improved. So I really don't see anything fundamentally negative for the market in the long term, which is a scary place to be because it puts everyone on the same side of sentiment. But it really is just a perfect setup.
Yeah, so strong. I mean, it could have kicked off with that kid that raised his hand at Mar-a-Lago with the funny glasses and asked Trump about crypto. I think I found out that was a gathering of people that had bought his NFT, I think. But
that was like a bonus, I think, for NFT holders at Mar-a-Lago. Yeah.
And that question that was got on video seemed to be a huge feedback loop. Now, I ran to be mayor of London twice here. And so what I used to do is when I would vlog every day, I would know within an hour if the issue I had talked about was resonating with people. And if it was, I would double down on it and triple down on it or investigate it or see if I could find out more why. And I think that was the moment where Trump realized that crypto was a powerful issue. Now, you might have asked your politicians, what took you so long? But he got it, and then he doubled and tripled and quadrupled down enough to where I think it was 2 weeks later, he's like, I'm not going to allow Elizabeth Warren and her thugs to touch your crypto. I'm going to go for self-custody. I'm going to abolish CBDCs. I mean, he really learned about the issue, or at least his people did. And I'm with you. Some people say, oh, it's just lip service, but I'll take lip service over what we've had for 3 years any day.
Says it's going to free Ross Ulbricht. I mean, he really hit on all of the core touch points for our industry, the real triggering things that had to have somebody very smart in his ear and telling him what to say. And to your point, I definitely think it started with a viral moment, as many things do. But we do know that he's surrounded with people like Vivek Ramaswamy, and a lot of people in the crypto industry are quietly in his ear and advising him. So he does have very smart people who understand this, telling him about it. So I do think that we're watching an evolution from fully political to actually being orange-pilled, which interestingly is something that we've seen with countless people over the years. I mean, the biggest Bitcoin bulls in the world right now, the people pushing it forward, including Michael Saylor himself, were all dismissive of Bitcoin initially. And I think it's one of my favorite quotes, strong opinions loosely held. Smart people, brilliant people, and those who tend to be the most successful are the ones who are willing to change their opinion when new facts are presented and say I was wrong, or when they do the work. And most people who are dismissive of Bitcoin, it's not their fault. They're seeing what the mainstream narratives are around it. They hear that it's for criminals and it's destroying the environment. And if you're not deeply interested in it, why would you do the deep dive? You just dismiss it and say, this is, it's not for me. But once you really do the work, it's a one-way street, I think. And I think Donald Trump is traveling down that one-way road right now. And it's really interesting to watch it with a person like him on the biggest stage in the world. It's a really, really interesting sort of intellectual endeavor if you've been here before and you've seen other people go through that process.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And we just saw Larry Fink go again on kind of live television and act, as Michael Saylor jokes, the chief marketing officer of Bitcoin, where he went again and went all in, and specifically on Bitcoin. And I remember I had this Scaramucci, the Mooch here, and he told me, he's like, Brian, 2 years ago, I bumped into him in Davos, and he's like, Larry said to him, you like Bitcoin? And he's like, yeah, I do. And he's like, I hate it. He's like, I see the tokenization, but I hate it. And I think the Mooch said, just spend some more time on it. I think you'll change your mind. Now, Mooch said he couldn't take credit for it. But again, it goes to show you that I guess that's why these people have great minds, is because hopefully they hold their opinions loosely, right? And can change their mind.
Yes. Mooch told me the exact same story. It was in the lobby of a Four Seasons, and then he saw him 2 years later. It really is an incredible story. And that's what convinced me. I trust Anthony, implicitly, having known him for a long time. That's what convinced me that Larry Fink wasn't just talking his book. But like Donald Trump with politics, I believe that initially Larry Fink was probably talking his book. And as you watch the evolution of these interviews, including the one just days ago with Jim Cramer of all people, you can see the kind of things he's saying about it are becoming more core Bitcoiner, right? This time, he wasn't just talking about its place in your portfolio or that it could be a viable asset class or just dispelling the negatives, right? Saying it's not a scam. It's not just for criminals. It has a use case. Now he's talking about it's very important for people in countries where you don't trust your government, where they're printing money, where inflation is running out of control, where they need an alternative if they're forced to exit and cross the border with some of their wealth. I mean, these are the core things that Bitcoiners have been saying for ages. And you're hearing it from Larry Fink, who manages over $10 trillion in assets. There's a joke in the United States. I don't know if you've ever heard it. You were a Wall Street trader, so probably, but you can interchange the fourth one. But there's four branches of the United States government, and people shake their head and they say there's three. There's the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. And there's no, it's executive, judicial, legislative, and BlackRock, right? And so when you have this guy out there, you can replace it with JP Morgan, some would say. But when you have the people of this caliber talking about Bitcoin in this way, you have to pay attention, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that Larry Fink's doing interviews this week when the Ethereum spot ETFs are launching next week. Right.
Yeah. And as Mooch and I talked about, nobody sells something better than Wall Street. And I think Larry finds something here that he can sell and sell for the next few decades. And like you said, the Ethereum's coming up next. They've gone all in on it. It is shocking to hear Larry really call out the government, when he's talking about inflation and money printing, when, as you said, people now pretty much agree JP Morgan is a de facto arm of the government. I mean, they're that closely tied, a lot of these banking institutions. So yeah, I'm shocked when I see him talk that overtly, like you said, about the Bitcoin narrative that would normally be something you would think would get a pushback from members of government. So it's really interesting times. And now JD Vance, 39 years old, millennial, pro-crypto. I dug up some old footage where he's calling out Gensler when he gave a talk out in Silicon Valley. I spoke to a crypto person a couple days ago. They said, in addition to having a sizable Bitcoin holding, which I think is rumored as much as $250,000, I heard he's got some big bags of altcoins as well. And
I bet he does.
Yeah, and that just makes me like him more, of course. What do you make of that?
So it's interesting because JD Vance obviously is ticking a lot of boxes for Trump. And so we saw even an article in the New York Post that implied that JD Vance was chosen because of his love for crypto and Trump wanting to lock down that market. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. And it was the New York Post, not Cointelegraph or CoinDesk, where I would have expected a crypto-focused narrative to be there. Listen, Trump has the crypto vote, and that's not changing, right? He locked that up over the past few months. He effectively kneecapped RFK, who had the sort of crypto vote, even if it wasn't going to someone who had a viable chance of winning. Trump completely took that. He didn't need to choose a pro-crypto vice president. So I think it's a silver lining to the crypto narrative, but certainly not the reason that he was chosen. That said, JD Vance is not a Bitcoiner because of politics, like some would say Donald Trump is. This is a guy who, before he was a politician, bought a bunch of Bitcoin because he believed in it. And, he has a lot of rhetoric in the past about regulators, specifically Gary Gensler in the SEC, as you've said, and wanting to deregulate and thinking that the system is fixed, and sort of all of, again, narratives that Bitcoiners have been talking about for a very, very long time. What I find interesting, I think he's a very interesting pick for Trump. I don't really get into the deep politics of it. What I actually find interesting, which is not a question you asked, but this newfound love for politicians in the Bitcoin community that is somewhat ironic. Originally, almost everybody who got into Bitcoin was a cypherpunk or a libertarian who was basically saying, F the government, I need a way to opt out. I'm buying Bitcoin. I'm going to self-custody it. Dollars going to zero, whatever the narratives were. I don't trust the government. But now when they see what happens when the government sort of comes on board, regardless of the purpose, you see them heavily being cheered. Now, there's nuance to that, right? Because if the Elizabeth Warren faction of the Democrats right now literally wants to ban self-custody, well, you need a politician who's going to come in and protect self-custody for you even to be able to do that. Or they come and take your Bitcoin with a gun, right? And I don't care how well your Bitcoin is self-custodied, when there's a gun in your face, you give it up, right? Like gold in the past. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's what's in the mind of Bitcoiners. But believing that Bitcoin needs some sort of champion or savior for it to continue into the future, or the industry in general, is very antithetical to the ethos of Bitcoin in the first place. So that's sort of like bipolarity I've found really interesting and hard to parse. Myself, I'm a non-political person. I find it incredibly impressive that someone like you can put yourself in the middle of that and try to affect change through the political process. Over the years, as I learned about Bitcoin being the catalyst, I sort of, you go from one side and then you sort of find yourself in the middle and you say, okay, I'm a centrist, but then you start to leave entirely. So it's like you're orbiting the process and watching everybody from above and wondering what the hell is going on. That's how I view myself. I'm not even independent. I'm unaffiliated, registered, right? I vote for whoever I want, if I want, but I see the parties as much as I love watching this happen, I still see them as a uniparty who are going to print our future away and the future of our children. And I don't think that train stops. And I don't think any of the politicians, as much as it's great to see them loving Bitcoin, are addressing the single most impactful issue, which is our debt, which is ballooning at $1 trillion every 100 days or whatever insane number it's at right now. I don't hear anybody talking about austerity or fixing that problem, which is the one that's destroying the lower and middle class and causing this crazy wealth divide. So it's great to cheer for the politicians who are going to help the industry. but they're not going to make the really big changes that we're here for.
Yeah, and you're not wrong. You're not wrong, Scott, at all. It is one party with two different colors and two different branches. And yeah, ultimately, you want to make sure you can keep your freedoms. And that's why, whether it's Larry or whether it's Donald or anybody else who's pro-Bitcoin, it's ultimately an instrument of freedom. And I think it's ultimately becomes a win for an individual. Regardless, at least it's going in that direction. But as far as politics, yeah, and I've been really close to it, and it didn't make me more confident about it, that's for sure. So it's like a sideshow, but it's also can make a real difference in the future of crypto and the embracement of it with Web3, as we know from the last administration, which really hindered it. So yeah, look, I don't think you're far off in those judgments. But this will be
at this point, I think we're mostly cheering for somebody to at least get out of the way. And we've had a contentious relationship with the government. Instead of that, I would take that happily, even if we don't get a full pro Bitcoin platform.
Just as an aside, why do you think Trump didn't pick Vivek?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't really think that was ever on the table, to be honest. I think maybe, in fact, I think the conjecture right now, and I know nothing, is that Vivek will take Vance's spot in Ohio as a senator. I think Vivek felt more like a close advisor and cabinet position, necessarily more so maybe than a VP. And I think that, Donald Trump at the end of the day is going to choose someone that he views more like an heir apparent this time. Also someone I think who is going to talk his book. And I think, likely was disappointed with how it ended with Pence. I think he thinks he's going to win. So it changes probably the thought process of who he's going to bring. But Vivek really feels like someone who would be a close advisor, and he didn't need to make vice president for any sort of political reason. I mean, JD Vance, you could see becoming a Donald Trump clone.
It's just whoever he picks is very high likelihood of the next 8 years. So it was a sense of discussion. And I really kind of like Vivek as an order. Maybe he was too big to be a VP. I don't know. Anyways, it's done. The convention's over. And now we're going forward. We got 3.5 months left. It'll be interesting. There's nothing written, even though Polymarket says it's high. We still don't know. So I guess we'll see. Next thing I want to ask you about is this Ethereum ETF. I think it's supposed to start trading Tuesday or Wednesday. What do you think will happen? It's a very different beast than the Bitcoin.
It's a very different beast, but there are pretty easy comparisons to make. And we have a very unfortunate one, which I think everybody was waiting to see the fee wars and how those would play out with all the issuers. And they played out worse than most would have expected, unfortunately. And I can explain that. So anyone who paid attention to the process of the Bitcoin spot ETFs knows that they were largely hyped for the better part of a half of a year because BlackRock had filed, even though they'd been rejected. Once BlackRock entered the fray, people started to say, wait, this could really happen, right? So you had 6 months of hype, 6 months of education. Bitcoin's already a brand name, right? And you had marketing campaigns and you had fee wars and this sort of crazy process leading up to what the Bloomberg guys had deemed the Cointucky Derby, right? And you'd never seen an ETF. ETFs are boring. You had never seen an ETF launch with multiple issuers at the same time fighting for AUM. So that was insane. But the real story of that launch at the time was GBTC and the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. So for anyone who doesn't know, GBTC was a closed-ended trust that effectively acted like an ETF for people. You could buy it and you could put it in your portfolio or your IRA, but it did not really trade to NAV, right? Which is the asset value of the underlying asset. So there were times in the bull market when it was trading at a tremendous premium. You could argue that that premium is what destroyed the bull market and destroyed Three Arrows Capital and FTX and BlockFi and all of them, because when it went to a discount, they were all completely hosed, right? But it was trading at a 50% discount. So there were tons of people when the ETF trade was on, this thing might get approved, who said, I can buy Bitcoin at a 50% discount at GBTC, right? Talking about billions of dollars. It was a 25 billion AUM when it launched, when the ETFs launched. So you had all the people that who wanted to exit that, who had taken that trade, didn't care about owning an ETF at all. They just were making a trade. Then you had people that were trapped and couldn't redeem for years. right? So they were looking to exit at any point. And then you had people who, when they saw the 1.5% fee, said, I'm going to take the pain of the capital gains right now, and I'm going to go to BlackRock or something that's at 20 bips, right? 0.2, 0.25, waivers for the first 6 months, no fees. You'd be nuts to pay a 1.5% fee. So what we saw was a quick move up for an hour when the Bitcoin spot ETFs launched, 47 to 49, and then a $10,000 sustained 20% dump for the next few weeks. And that was because Grayscale literally was being forced, because when people sell GBTC, Grayscale has to sell spot Bitcoin into the market, $500 to $1 billion a day of selling pressure. Insane selling pressure until it was down to like 11 billion. It abated and we saw a move to 74,000. Okay. Long premise, but the Ethereum spot ETF, everybody said, well, Grayscale had to have learned a lesson that everybody exited. There's no way they're going to not be competitive with fees. This thing still has 10 billion in AUM, the Ethereum Trust, ETH. That's actually, relative to the Ethereum market, much bigger than GBTC was at 25 billion. If you think about it, the total size of the market. They came in at a 2.5% fee. 2.5%. That's not high for crypto. That's not high for ETFs. That's high for this earth. That's high for hedge funds who charge 2 and 20, right? 2.5% is more than a hedge fund charges you to handle your money. So everybody's going to leave. So you have $10 billion overhang on the Ethereum spot ETF, which concerns me greatly, into a lower volume, lower liquid, smaller asset than Bitcoin. So if you saw 20% drawdown on Ethereum, on Bitcoin, I have no idea what will happen, but 25, 30% drawdown on Ethereum, if you just kind of crunch the numbers. In a slower market, in this sort of summer doldrum with an asset that people are less educated on. So my guess is we see a pretty large drawdown. That was a long-winded way of explaining my thesis for a pretty sustained drawdown before it does what Bitcoin did, and goes slow and the demand comes in and it rises. So I think that should be clear. As much as that's a bearish case in the short term for Ethereum, it's really an opportunity, because I think long term it does exceptionally well. And there's a lot of reasons that people would buy these ETFs to diversify within crypto, right? If you're an institutional investor who only now has access to Bitcoin spot ETFs, look at what having an ETH ETF does to your Sharpe ratio, right? It increases your odds over time of having another idiosyncratic asset in your portfolio, an uncorrelated asset, which is sort of the holy grail. So they're going to launch. I'd be surprised if it's particularly successful relative to Bitcoin. I think maybe we see 20 to 25% of the interest, but with a larger sort of supply overhang. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Grayscale did create a mini product that's 0.25 bips in line with everything else, but you can only move 10% of ETH into it. I literally, I don't understand. They fired their CEO, or he stepped down, Michael Sonnenschein, and to his credit, he beat the SEC, right? Which unlocked this entire thing. You got to give all credit to Grayscale. I just have tried to consider every angle of this, and I just don't get it. I mean, they're obviously making a bet that there's enough people who won't leave because of the capital gains implications that they can make it up on the higher fee, but it's going to probably destroy the market for a while.
And then medium term, for the demand for this, do you think it could ramp up and just be significant, if not more than BTC? I mean, I read an argument that people understand BTC as digital gold, but people see Ethereum as like a digital technology play that maybe has more upside. Yeah. Do you think the market will get that? Or is that assuming a lot of education for, say, a sovereign wealth fund in Qatar that still is getting their head around a Bitcoin ETF?
I think the market will get that in the long term. We'll start hearing about that in 6 months to a year, and that's going to take a raging bull market, which we kind of all expect, at the end of this year and into 2025, based on the 4-year cycle. Doesn't mean it'll happen. But I think that's going to be the pitch, right? And a Wall Street investor actually may understand hey, this is an NVIDIA or a Google or a tech play, that argument better than they understand digital gold. The funny thing is that people forget, if you go to an RIA, a registered investment advisor in the United States in general, in the last few years, and you say, hey, invest my money for me, they say, we'll do a 60-40 portfolio, right? 60% stocks, 40% bonds. It's 2022 was the worst year in history for it, but throwing that out, generally it's been historically successful. You don't hear them saying 60, 38, 2% gold. They don't do it. So they don't make money on getting you to buy gold, probably. But hard assets like gold are not in portfolios that are managed by professionals, period. So digital gold does not resonate with them at all, right? So Bitcoin has actually kind of a different unique challenge, maybe even than Ethereum does, because you can say Ethereum's a tech play. Get it in there, dude. Have you seen what tech's done? Look at the NASDAQ, right? So I think that might be an easier pitch actually for a lot of them, to your point. So I have a feeling that's what the issuers are going to really focus on selling, like trying to educate them on staking and, on proof of stake and the functionality and dApps and all these things. That's not going to fly. You got to give them the top line bullet points and call it a day.
All right. Well, then taking this a little further, how far out is the Solana ETF? Could it happen this year on this SEC's watch? Probably not, but maybe it could. And then if so, just your thoughts on Solana. Pantera put out in their monthly newsletter recently a whole case for it. They called it the Apple OS of blockchains. And it was a pretty compelling argument. And there are some pretty compelling things about it. Your thoughts.
Okay, so I was utterly and completely wrong about the odds of a Solana ETF. So I'll put that out there as something I thought was literally impossible. I had Matthew Siegel of VanEck on my show.
Yeah, I saw that. Nice.
One day, maybe a couple Wednesdays ago. And I passively said, when talking about Ethereum spot ETFs, I said, did you see these guys filing for a Solana ETF in Canada? That'll never happen here. And he had this awkward pause. And he said, well, you might be surprised, Scott. And they filed the next day, right? So listen, that doesn't mean my premise that it won't get approved is different, but it means that a company as serious as VanEck feels like this is an appropriate time to start the race, right? And that could be a multiple year race, just like Bitcoin took 10 years, right? That could be a multiple year race, but I was wrong, right? And so under this regime, 0% chance. I would put it at, maybe 1% because black swans happened, just as you said. Under a deregulated regime with a Hester Peirce type at the head of the SEC, I think all bets are off and anything's possible. But to my understanding, the way that the ETFs have been sort of considered with Bitcoin and then Ethereum sort of getting in the back door because of Bitcoin and because of the political winds change. You got to remember, nobody expected Ethereum to get approved.
Exactly.
And it took Trump completely blowing things up for the SEC to do that overnight when they were about to all get dismissed. But Bitcoin and Ethereum both have regulated institutional CME futures, right? And so when you saw the arguments for the approval of a Bitcoin spot ETF, a lot of it was about there being a market of significant size and surveillance sharing agreements and all these terms that we all became experts on, but had never heard in our lives until we were watching the Bitcoin spot ETF process like it was the Super Bowl. But no other coin has that, right? So I think that there's a very good chance, as Matt explained it to me, being the expert, he said, listen, we believe there's other angles they can take or where we can convince them that we have those things. But the layup was, these are trading on the CME. If the CME can trade futures in an unmanipulated manner, then we can have ETFs for them. So I would actually kind of be interested to see if we start seeing news from the CBOE or CME or a highly regulated market on futures. Because if we'd gotten an Ethereum futures ETF, that made the Ethereum spot ETF very hard to reject, right? So I think it's a bit far down the road. Honestly, I don't really see the demand for it. Like, maybe if Ethereum's exceptionally popular, we'll see a lot more people put their hat in the ring for a Solana ETF. Or maybe I'm just underestimating where Solana will be in 6 months or a year when this is likely to happen. But listen, I'm here for any win we can get, and it would be amazing. And I do think now with the higher likelihood of regime change, it is actually on the table. Yeah,
I mean, we forget that, Polymarket had the Ethereum ETF at like a 6% possibility in May, and that surprised us. I had Chris Giancarlo in here of the CFTC a couple years ago, and he was very proud of the fact that he was the guy that brought in the Bitcoin and the Ethereum futures, into that marketplace. And for people that don't know, it's the second largest regulator of financial markets, but they're very pro-utility as opposed to consumer protectionist in vibe. So if they see a demand for it, they can put these things out there. And yeah, like you said, that was a good reason to allow those ETFs, although that wasn't making Ethereum going to happen until the political winds change. Then there's the argument that once Ethereum's in and it's not definitely a security, then that could grandfather in a lot of things and kind of use it as momentum to kind of leapfrog it. I think of it like maybe a cyclist kind of drafting behind the Ethereum one, and then they go around. So
that's exactly right. And there's more nuance to this, right? So when I was utterly dismissive of it was before we sort of saw this just aggressive Supreme Court movement of multiple cases in 1 week that seemed to sort of shake the regulatory regimes in the United States in general. The reversal of Chevron doctrine reverence was huge, because it effectively said, and this is, that's basically the ruling that originally gave regulators the power to create laws without creating laws, or to make judgments that effectively were treated like law. For example, saying in a suit against a Coinbase or a Binance, these 11 coins are securities based on the Howey test. That doesn't fly anymore. So what they've said about these assets is no longer legally relevant at all, right? It's up to the judges, or of course you hope that Congress will actually legislate on these things, but it's up to the court to decide these things. And the regulators are not allowed to go back and look at precedent and make a determination. So Gary Gensler right now, according to the Supreme Court, can't tell you what's a security or not a security based on the Howey test in that way, right? So what does that mean? Well, that means that the case against Coinbase is ludicrous, because the case against Coinbase is that they're selling a whole bunch of unregistered securities, which the SEC now does not have the right to call unregistered securities, right? And so that does open the path for all of these things as ETFs. I think the more interesting story, because the way that people invest in the United States, if you look, because nobody knows how to invest. So what they do is they either call an RIA or they buy ETFs, mutual funds, index funds, and they passively invest. Indexing is the key to all investing. If you look at BlackRock's holdings, everybody loves to say BlackRock owns all these Bitcoin miners. They own so much MicroStrategy. They're not actively buying this. This is passively putting them into the index funds to rebalance when people buy their index funds. People invest in index. So what becomes interesting to me is a top 10 crypto ETF, a DeFi ETF, a layer one ETF. That's, I think, where the future is, where we'll actually see interest, because at the end of the day, if that's available, you don't buy a Solana ETF, you go buy Solana, right? There's no reason not to really go buy Solana. I mean, for institutions, obviously there's like fiduciary reasons or access, but that will probably be deregulated as well to some degree. So I think that the indexing is really the future there. But like, think about Coinbase right now. And this really, I think, displays more than anything the insanity of US government policy right now and the regulatory overreach that we've seen for years, but certainly with this regime. You have this case against them for being an unregistered broker-dealer, and for selling, effectively allowing the sale of unregistered securities. So we now know that the SEC can't really say that, but the former, you would think, if it's an unregistered broker, that could be a death sentence. I'm sure you saw recently the $30 million deal that Coinbase did with the DOJ and the Marshal Service to custody, invest, and trade all of the seized crypto assets, including the Silk Road Bitcoin, which we've seen sold on Coinbase. So what you have in the United States is the Department of Justice and the Marshals using Coinbase to sell assets that they've seized, those assets deemed by the SEC as unregistered securities. Repeat that. The SEC says Coinbase cannot operate, it's illegal, and the Department of Justice says that's the exchange we are going to use as a government to sell these things that you are saying are illegal to trade. It's absolutely insane.
Well, if I never hear the Howey test mentioned, it is going to be too soon.
It's the 1930s. What are we doing here, man? It's been 90 years.
Exactly. It's just been the thing Gary parroted over and over again. Don't get me started. I actually took his entire 24-hour course at Sloan School of Management at MIT on YouTube, and he's surprisingly intelligent, extremely well versed in crypto. Back then, by the way, he said in the class that it wasn't a security. But anyways, politics will make a man do bad things.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you want a cautionary tale on politicians that we cheer for damaging us, that's the cautionary tale. When Gary Gensler was appointed, you would have thought he was the Jesus of blockchain coming in. We cheered him. The industry said it was amazing. He teaches at blockchain. He teaches at MIT blockchain. He understands it, and he absolutely destroyed us. So that's what is always in my mind when I'm cheering for any politician or regulator who might be appointed.
Yeah, exactly. And then he got pulled in the back room with Elizabeth and Biden and said, if you want Treasury Secretary, you better do what we say.
You ain't getting that.
What's that?
You ain't getting that.
Yeah, exactly. I still can't get my head around that. It can't be that simple. But anyways, so just to finish this out, how do you feel about Solana? You know, I'll be honest, it was never on my radar in a huge way in the last bull cycle. Recently, we've been investing quite a bit into Web3 startups. We've done about 50 deals, about $12 million. And we've done them now about 4 or 5 deals in the Solana ecosystem. So I'm starting to get more familiar with it. And of course, there's downsides, there's network outages, there's complaints. It used to be very few nodes, et cetera. But I also see a lot of upside, and I'm feeling quite bullish about it versus Ethereum. Maybe curious what you think. I think you've changed your mind of this as well.
I'm in the why not both camp, right? And I've long said that if you want to invest in crypto, you buy Bitcoin. You feel what it's like to hold it. You move a bit of it around, and then you go a little further down the risk curve. And I would have said next you buy Ethereum, which I maybe would say, and then next you buy Solana. Well, now maybe you buy some Ethereum and you buy some Solana. You know, and I think they're starting to, not financial advice, but they're starting to definitely be in line. But I also think that you have to look at what happened in the market. And we know that nothing is better marketing for any asset, especially in crypto, than rising prices, right? Higher prices beget higher prices, gets more people, it gets FOMO. That's, you know, what really drives parabolic cycles. So of all the things that sort of got destroyed in crypto during the contagion of the past few years, Solana was the worst, right? And that was because effectively of the relationship with FTX and with SBF being a huge investor, FTX holding a lot of the coin, and the false perception that it was basically Sam's layer one, right? And so it got disproportionately destroyed. You got to remember that in the down market, really, Ethereum kind of outperformed Bitcoin. People don't really look at it, but, you know, like Bitcoin bottomed at 20-ish or something, and, you know, Ethereum went to 800. And then Bitcoin continued down to 15,000, and Ethereum never really lost 1,000 again, right? So it kind of made a higher low while everything else was making a lower low. So Ethereum didn't fall as far. Solana fell so disproportionately far because of FTX and SBF that even the mean reversion trade on Solana should have been, hindsight is 2020, the most obvious thing in the world. If you didn't think Solana was going to zero, which many people did, you should have known that just to catch up with everything else, it had a 5-10x trade in it, right? And of course, it's done 20, 30 more X from $8 at the bottom. But so I think that as it rose, people got very interested. More developers kind of went, and it captured the zeitgeist of the crypto native speculators, right? So as you said, you've made a couple of your investments, right? Less than 10%-ish of your investments into Solana. I think there's some incredible things being built there. Raoul Pal has convinced me, like every time I have him on, he's such a bull and talking about Fire Dancer, and that there's really something major there. And I do believe that. But the bulk of the network activity is a bunch of degenerate gamblers launching meme coins and pumping and dumping on each other, right? 500,000 meme coins a month at the peak being launched on Solana. That's not an indictment of Solana. People should be able to do whatever they want. And that does accrue value to the chain, but that's fleeting, you know, in my mind. So it's hard for me to parse what's the real numbers and what's like literally, we launched 2,000 tokens today that existed for 2 hours, right? But you need Solana to be able to buy those. So it definitely accrues value to Solana. And I think there's some pretty compelling evidence that the early meme coin trend on Solana was actually the existing Solana whales who were doing that, knowing that it would bring more sort of price action and demand to Solana. So it's a really interesting use case. I think Solana will continue to fly, and I think that it will be here forever, and real things will be built on it. I still think, DeFi and the serious.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website, londonreal.tv, or click the link in the description below. So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real. And he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, do you want to profit from crypto? Then join my DeFi Academy. The Crypto DeFi Academy will help you create generational wealth. But don't take my word for it. Listen to my students.
When I first got into crypto, I remember thinking to myself, I need to learn more. Brian Rose, learning crypto, learning DeFi, got to do it.
I am so grateful that I jumped in and did this. I had to break through some limiting beliefs that I can do this, that I can afford this, that I can be in this.
It challenges the things that are deeply rooted within us.
Joining DeFi Academy has been one of the best decisions I have made on my blockchain journey.
This course was a life changer, a game changer, a huge eye-opener, coming from knowing practically nothing at the speed of the learning over 4 weeks. Was just fantastic.
The information you provided in this class was invaluable.
I feel far more confident in my next steps.
You took complex concepts and made them easier to understand.
What's different than so many other ones is it just doesn't tell you what to do. It actually makes you do it.
This is for people who are serious about becoming traders. This is the way it should be done.
I realized from this learning experience again that it is not about what you learn, but about who you learn it from.
The energy was insane. I've never experienced such incredible energy on a live call. Brian Rose, you are a legend, my friend.
It's the only thing in the market where you can get all information and learn everything what you need to know.
Everything is so clear and so well done, and I am just forever grateful for this program.
It made me feel so much more confident about crypto than I did before.
I did not anticipate how passionate I was going to become about it.
It's also been like a big learning experience for me, not just in the crypto space, but just an overall balance of life.
What I've learned is, how to take ownership, of my life in a way that I really hadn't before.
Yeah, you can't put a price on that, really.
I would recommend it to anybody, top notch.
Excellence does not come cheap. So if you want excellence, you got to pay for it, but it's so worth it.
Pull the trigger. That's what this course is about.
You're not going to regret it, really. It's amazing.
Thank you, Brian and team.
So what are you waiting for? Crypto is happening now. Click the link below, submit your application, and let me mentor you on how to create generational wealth and build the decentralized financial infrastructure of the future.